Welcome to Becoming Bridge Builders. This podcast will cover a wide range of topics like racial equity, anti-racism, critical race theory, education, and justice reform, just to whet your appetite. We will delve deeper into subjects many are reluctant to debate. I do not consistently agree with my guest, nor do they always see events from my Christian viewpoint. But here, we create a safe space for discussion. You cannot understand tough topics if you merely have one side of history. The aim here is to get to the core of the issues. There are individuals who are hurting, and their issues are being disregarded or avoided. On this podcast, we analyze ways to build bridges over the streams of disharmony, and we do that with one piece of steel at a time. You will hear practical solutions to complex issues. Only truth can build a bridge to wholeness. Now, here's your host and the facilitator of our conversation, Haney.
My guest today is Lacey C. Clarke, aka Miss Phenomenal Everywhere. Is a multifaceted personification of expression art, rich culture, soulful global travel, and fierce femininity that inspires the masses. Laci excites and educates with tales of her stereotypical transcending travels. She inspires women of all backgrounds to stay true to themselves. Her beliefs in empowerment are reflected in her thriving brands, Phenomenally You, Phenomenal Everywhere, and Sisters of Sanctuary. With a career spanning over 2 decades, Lacey C. Clarke's work has reached over 20 countries and 5 continents, touching the lives of millions, both online and offline. Her desire is to impact by providing inspirational messages laced with self-esteem to boost content and encourage women on their journey. We welcome her to the show. Welcome. My guest today is Laci, and we're going to talk about the ministry that she's doing, but I'm going to give her a good question to kind of warm her up first, because we don't want our guests walking in and just have to dive into the topic. So here's a good question for you. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Thank you for that question. I'll say the best advice that I've ever received is to love yourself.
Okay. Love
yourself. And it was the best advice because I think self-love is a foundation for all activity, not only, just relationships, but finances and, just everything in life starts with self-love and valuing yourself. And so I think love yourself is the most powerful, impactful advice I've ever received.
That's interesting because I just had a guest on. We were talking about her life, and she dealt with some abuse in her life. And
sure,
what abuse did for her was it really had her doubt herself, had her think that she wasn't worthy. And I think people become more victimized when they don't understand. What I would say to people is, if you don't understand your place in the world and how God uniquely crafted you, and designed you and specifically placed you where you are more open to what the world will say about you.
Absolutely.
And the world will always try and tear you down.
Absolutely. So, right. They'll define you instead of you defining you.
Right. Exactly. That's I like that one. Now I got to warn all my guests. See, when I ask these questions of what's your best advice, I usually say, okay, I heard someone say, and I might even give you credit. But the third time, I'll go, as I've always said. So if you hear this on a future podcast, it's because, I got it from you. But
got it. Cool. Let me just say Lacey C. Clarke. Yes.
That's right. So tell us something about yourself that the audience who's just meeting you for the first time doesn't know about you.
So hi, audience. Well, one of the unique things about me is I lived on 5 continents, and people don't know that by looking at me. I started traveling when I was 19, older than 19.
Just a little bit older than 19.
I'm older than 19 now. But I lived on 5 continents, and I think that my experiences around the world as a woman, as a Black woman, as a human being, it's just been enriched by being immersed in different cultures. And it has kind of helped me to shape the work that I do today. And it helps me to shape how I want young women to see themselves as well, just kind of as a expanded being, not necessarily living in a box. because there's so many boxes that the world can put you in. And so just by by just meeting me, you wouldn't be able to tell that I lived on 5 continents.
Right. So a follow-up to that question, which continent did you find the most interesting?
That's a great question. I would say Asia. Because it's interesting. Like I lived in Ghana, visited Senegal. I loved being in Africa, but what was challenging for me is how much Africa was influenced by colonization, and how that was disappointing, because a lot of times you want to learn about, there's definitely a lot of history and culture for sure in Africa, to learn about where we come from and why, we've created the worlds that we've created, our legacy. But Asia was interesting for me because my experience with Asians was in the United States. And I find that the United States changes people in this culture. Like, you can meet somebody in Asia and then you meet them in the United States and they're like 2 different people. It's just like, how did that happen? But I think because of the competition and capitalism and all that kind of stuff, it really just changes people. But to me, the most interesting continent for me was Asia, because I felt like, my first introduction to Asia was Thailand. And Thailand, to me, was the first place that I felt like I didn't have to live in this box of like blackness. I love being black. I love who I am. It's just that it becomes a box that we stay in, and we don't really understand that there's so many facets to being a human being, being a black person, being a woman. There's so many different facets to that. So Thailand, for me, I didn't feel like I have a show, one woman show, a solo play I talk about called Phenomenal Everywhere, which is about my experience as a black woman living on 5 continents or around the world. And I said it was the first place that I felt like I could just be. I didn't feel like I had to, like, it wasn't like, oh, you're the black tourist, the black student, the black this, the black. You were just a foreigner, and they saw me as a foreigner with green money. So the color that was relevant was green. You know what I mean?
Only color that matters is green.
And so, green money. And so that was the focus that they had with me at first was, you're here, you're spending money, and so you're a foreigner, period. They didn't know where I was from. I know when I opened my mouth, they could tell I was American, of course. But it was interesting. And so I lived also in Malaysia. And Malaysia was interesting as well because it's a Muslim country. So that's another different type of perspective that people saw me. As a woman traveling, I was actually traveling solo. Like, that doesn't really happen in Muslim countries. It's like, wow, like what do you, where's your man? Like, where's the part? It's so funny because I had this funny story. I was in a hotel, and the first time was a border run. Long story short, border run is when you have to renew your visa when you're in a certain country to renew your visa. So you have to go to the nearest border or wherever border and cross it, and then they'll reset your visa for whatever country you're in. So I was actually on the border run, and I went to Malaysia, and I was in a hotel, and the cleaning staff was men. I've never seen like cleaning staff be, men. So he said, "Where are the other shoes?" I said, "What do you mean other shoes?" And what he was saying was, "Where are the man's shoes?" And like, he was cleaning my room. Like, where are the man's shoes? I was like, no, he just couldn't understand it. Like, he did this, his mindset was just really like, why are you by yourself kind of vibe. So it was just very, very interesting, living in a Muslim country. And then the reflection or the assumptions people made about me, or the excitement people had about me, not knowing or not meeting someone who's like had the freedom to travel by themselves. Some of the women were really intrigued, like, oh man, like, tell me more about that. And then some of the men were like intimidated, like, you're supposed to be with a man. Like, why aren't you with a man? So Asia was very interesting to me. I have so many, this is the whole point of Phenomenal Everywhere, because it's like, I talk about these different stories and these different aspects of how people see me, how I saw people, my reflection or my, perspective of the culture that I'm looking at coming from North Philadelphia. North Philadelphia, America, my American eyes. So all of those things is what the show is about and what the story is about, to really kind of share the different experiences all over the world. So yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
It's neat because when you talk about the culture thing, I think as we talk about the issues in our country today, we don't realize that culture plays a huge role in it. Because We're only used to the American culture. And so
Absolutely.
as I try to explain people about race in America, I say to them, I say, I don't know if I would say America is systemically racist as much as America is systemically oppressive, because oppression really focuses on my culture, or the dominant culture has to maintain power. And in doing so, what they do is they suppress any other culture and eradicate their background to make them fit in with whatever the dominant culture is, which is oppression. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're Black or Asian or Hispanic. You have to be like me. And I was kind of compare it to the Borg, you will be assimilated kind of a thing. And so when we don't seem to know how to welcome and respect other cultures. Like working with a church one time.
Diversity is
yeah, and they were doing a special service for Cinco de Mayo. And instead, they were a German church. And so instead of having, Hispanic food for Cinco de Mayo, they had brats and German potato salad. And didn't understand how that wasn't really being culturally sensitive. So I think your perspective of you have to learn to understand other cultures and appreciate them and then welcome them and receive them for what they are and not try to make them adapt. And so the idea of the colonization part that you talked about
facts, right,
is like the Europeans saw the Black cultures or the Indian cultures in India as inferior and as savages and need to be more civilized.
Civilized and wiped out.
So and so we see the problem when you try and think that your culture is superior.
Absolutely. I would say yes and to what you just said. I think that it's so interesting. Sometimes, like I said, we get so caught up in our pain that we don't understand it's like a universal pain. I think that there's specifics that make, the African American experience in the United States a unique one specifically. But I think that the strategy that was used by colonizers, by, the imperialism, et cetera, is the same all across the board. So it's like, you don't get to have a culture. Your culture doesn't really matter. I get to take your culture and do whatever it is that I want to do with it. And again, if you're not modeling me, then you're not successful.
Right.
If you're not owning my standard that I'm creating for the world, then you're not, on par with things that are great, and we see that constantly, what we deem, even today, what we deem as, accomplishments and success are related to standards that have been created for us. So yeah, I think that cultural piece is really deep. And like you said, it happens across the board. Asians that come into the United States, as I said, is a big difference.
Right.
Experiencing Asians in Asia, or Malaysians in Asia, Thais, and it's like a whole different world. But then they come to the United States, it's a whole different thing. It's like, wow, so it's very, very rich what you're saying. And I would just say everybody is experiencing an eradication, if you will, of the fullness of their culture because they have to survive or to be successful.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right.
So I'm dying to ask you, when you sent me your name, it was Lacey C. Clarke with an exclamation point at the end. What's that all about?
I love that question. Thank you for asking. Wow. So that actually came about in college, right? Talking about the whole phenomenally you, talking about young women transitioning, having a healthy transition into college. They happened in college. It happened in college because I'm an artist at heart. Like I just love being creative. So all the things that I've created have come from a creative space, creative mind, creative heart. And my late roommate, friend, sister, we were talking about ways to always stand out. You know what I mean? Like, how do you stand out? When you send out your resume. This was back in the day when there was no real internet, so we had to send a resume. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you got 50,000 resumes on the table. How do you stand out? And so my sister's like, you know what? We could put, you are so, you're so dynamic and you're so out there. And when people see your name, they should see your personality. And so the exclamation point came about because it's kind of like, yeah, I'm exciting. Yeah, I'm dynamic. Yeah, So the explanation point was how that came about back in college when it was about standing out in terms of putting your name on a resume and having people think about you. When they think about you, what they think of. And so the excitement with the explanation point made so much sense.
That's cool.
And that stuck with me forever. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to put awesome in front of my name, but being a pastor, it just doesn't sound humble. So I can't, so I just.
Yeah, but I'm an advocate for that. I'm an advocate for putting awesome Keith Haney.
See, I have to have other people call me that, because if I say it myself, people will have to, they'll question me. So you talked about a show that you wrote, and you kind of touched little bit about what led you to write the show, but tell us more about it, and why is it a solo act?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Phenomenal Everywhere is my life story, my memoir put on stage, solo theater piece. It really, because I had started doing the empowerment work with young women. I've been doing this for 20 years. So I did seminars and workshops and speaking engagement. A lot of it was me doing the work kind of from an educational standpoint. So, I would do, again, like, here's, right now it's like 8 steps to how you get to empowerment. So it's kind of like it was more educational. And I had reached a point in my personal life where I was very low. I was actually suicidal. And when I was suicidal, I had to dig deep and think about, well, who are you and what have you done? Like, what has your life become? What is your life? What's important to you? And so I started writing a gratitude list. And in that gratitude list, I started I was like thinking about all the different things that I've done in my life. I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, I've shared this, I've shared that, I've touched this person, touched that. And that's how the show became, how the show was born. And it really saved my life, because I had to shift my focus from, I don't want to be here anymore, to what have you contributed? And what else do you have to contribute? And so Phenomenal Everywhere was born, and it was about my journey into loving myself, because I had taught this for so many years to so many young women around the world. It was like, well, what is your journey? How did you come to, practice self-love? And what was that like for you? And so that's the story, is my self-love journey set to the 5 continents on stage.
That's great.
Thank you.
People today deal with a lot of negative self-image and attitudes about themselves. Sure. How do you help, especially young women? Because I think this is who I'm kind of directing a lot of this podcast, this episode to, is sure. Young women who I think right now are trying to find themselves, or maybe even down on themselves. So how do you help them to overcome those negative attitudes?
A lot of the negativity that we consume is outside. Now, it definitely can come inside, or definitely can come from inside, but usually it's outside first. So like some of the voices that people hear in their head came from their parents first, right? So it's like, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're not gonna do blah, 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 blah. So those voices became their self-talk. The journey to empowerment and self-love is to own the awareness of where this stuff comes from first. Like, so to say, where'd you learn that you think you're dumb? Like, I'm not smart enough, or I don't, like, that came from somewhere. That came from a voice. And so when you can say that you now are in charge of the voices that you let in, and you now are in charge of what you are going to think about yourself, that's where the power comes in. We talk about negative self-image. A lot of it is a comparison piece. Somebody else is better than me. Someone's prettier than me. Somebody's, more whatever than me. And it's like, when you own your own phenomenality, your own sauce, your own power, then you can stand and say, well, I have greatness too. So it's not they are better than me. It's I am as well. You know what I'm saying? No matter who the people are. Now, there are people who have lots of accomplishments, of course. They have this, and they've done that. They've been in the game, doing whatever they do, whatever their shine is. But you too have that phenomenality that you can grab on and step into yourself and be the best that you can be. So I think when you ask that question, it's about owning the power and the purpose you have within yourself, and then edifying that. And that's where phenomenality comes from.
That's great. I always told my young people when I was growing up, when I was teaching them in classes, that one of my favorite verses for them was from Ephesians, where God says, "You are a masterpiece." And the thought that that God uniquely created each and every one of us to be his Renoir, his